put on the timer to kind of maintain. So business models with an impact, business models that matter, is something that I really care about. And it's the extension of my work that was presented before, a book that we worked on for about a year, but which is the extension of all my research on business models and business model innovation. So how do organizations create, deliver, and capture value? But I think a subset of that is actually really important. It's not just about profits, right? But it's also about impact. As I said before, we have big issues in the world. We need to think about sustainability. We have huge poverty in the world. We have sanitation problems. We need to solve those. And I think business models that make a profit can actually help contribute to that. So, I'm going to look at 4 questions in the 20 minutes that we have. First one is, well, why does this matter? Why is this important? Second one is, well, what actually are business models, this buzzword? Who has ever used the word business model? Who's never used it? Never ever? Lucky you. And then we're going to look at how do we come up with organizations like that have an impact. And at the very end, I'm just going to introduce you a little bit into the project that we're looking at today. So where can you deepen this thinking, or where are we deepening this thinking? Because the book that we wrote on business models, we actually did it with a large community of 470 people. We did it openly. And like Joachim said, I think it's about collaboration, and Alexis talked about collaboration as well. There's a lot of knowledge out there, so we worked together on that. And in business models with an impact, it's the same thing. There are a lot of entrepreneurs out there that are creating businesses that have an impact, that are changing the world, and we need to pool that knowledge to have an impact together. So let me start with the why, and I want to start with an anecdote. This is a very personal anecdote. So let me first introduce you to my 2 kids. That's Tatif, 6 years old, and Marina, 3 years old. And that's Marlie, my wife, mother of the 2 kids. And she comes from a very tiny country in Africa called Guinea-Bissau. So over here, south of Senegal, probably never heard of it, maybe you've heard of it. And it's a very poor country. And Marlie left when she was 7 years old. She grew up in Switzerland, but she obviously still has a lot of family there. And she got a phone call about 2 months ago. And the phone call was from her family, and they said that one of her relatives passed away. Now, the person died because there was no direct access to health infrastructure, because the country was so poor, and because they didn't want to spend money, they couldn't get to a hospital quick enough. Now, there are a lot of problems like that in the world. That's a dramatic one. We have a lot of other problems, and we need to solve them, right? The question is, well, how can we solve those? Let me take you in the time machine first. Don't look in there too long. It'll disappear. And I'll show you how we thought of these issues before. Well, the first thing I want to say is that the world was divided in 2. So we looked at it, and I'm a bit schematic here, but it's pretty much accurate. We looked at it in 2 ways. That either you give, so you give to the needy as a charity, or as a person who gives to charity and the charity helps. Or you're on the other side and you make money. And maybe you make money and you give, but you don't combine both, right? Isn't it? Didn't we used to think like that? Well, the world has definitely changed, but that's how it looked at then. So let me conceptualize this a little bit. So, not-for-profit organizations were looking at social impact. Businesses were looking at financial profit. Old school corporation, right? And we had fairly few people or organizations that were doing both. Would you agree with me? Right? Now, the world has really changed, is changing, and I think some of our thinking is changing. Maybe not enough yet. But there are people who say, well, of course a business has to make a profit, but profit also has to have a purpose. Now, that's a new breed of entrepreneurs or intrapreneurs in companies who think that they can combine both. They can have an impact, and they can make a profit. And I'm not talking about social corporate responsibility here. It's not an annex. It's in the DNA of an organization. So let's look at that. So when we wrote our book, this is one spread double page out of the book that we wrote on business models. It's a very visual book. We have 7 faces of business model innovators. So you have the usual suspects, you have the CEO, you have the middle manager, you have the entrepreneur, you have the intrapreneur, but you also have what you might want to call the conscientious entrepreneur, or the social entrepreneur, the word that we use a lot. People who have a vision that they want to have an impact, but they say this is not at the expense of profits, because profits can be good, they can drive our organization. What we need to do is combine both. But not everybody thinks like that yet. So I'm not saying that it's only about organizations that make profit and have an impact, but we need to have more people who think like that, because the world is still a little bit divided, like I showed before. We need to think that we can invest in organizations, our time, our money, organizations that can do both, because many of us, aspire to have an impact in the world. And some think, still I think, that it's either or. I think we can show that it can be and. So, let me talk a little bit about business models. That was the core of the book on business model innovation, and it's a core part about business models with an impact, business models that matter. So I want to get you to work for 1 minute, groups of 2. Since it's the middle of the afternoon, you might be a bit tired now. No coffee yet. After my talk, there's coffee. What I want you to do is work with your seat neighbor, groups of 2, and answer this question. What is a business model? Because most of you have used the word, so you know what it is. Go ahead, 1 minute. What's a business model? But I do this every time because when I won't do this now, but when I collect the definitions and what people think a business model is, that's what we get. We all have a different perception of what it is. Now that doesn't matter as such, but if we want to think about business models, innovative ones, that A, are different, make money, and have an impact, we need to speak the same language. We need to be able to communicate in a powerful way so we can come up with these business models, right? So when we were doing our research at the university 10 years back, well, that's what we realized, that there was no language there. And we wanted to create a shared language to help us think about business models, which will also help us think about business models that have an impact. So we came up with something. It's a tool that we call the business model canvas. It's a canvas because you can paint it up. You can draw up on a wall what business you're talking about. And it's not as complicated as the diagram that we saw in change management, I assure you. But it's really important because we need to be able to describe those business models so we can think about change, if we want to change our existing organization, or if we want to invent some of these powerful business models that can have an impact, that can change the world, that can do something for sustainability or poverty alleviation, okay? So what's that about? I'll quickly run you through it. We won't go deep here. But it's about 9 blocks. If you have these 9 blocks, you can describe any organization. That can be a not-for-profit, it can be a government, it can be a business. And we're interested in this talk in business models with an impact. Okay? So first, starts with customers, straightforward. Every organization has customers. They have problems, they have issues to solve, they want something to get done. You offer them something, a value proposition. It's your product, your service, a bundle of products and services, right? Then you have to ask yourself, well, how do these people want to be reached? Through which channels? Is it the internet? Is it a store? Is it a person? And then you have to ask yourself, well, what kind of relationships do we put in place? Is it automated? Is it a website where you can have your profile? Or is it a person? Because that will have implications for your costs. And then you have to ask yourself, well, what are people willing to pay for? And if we talk about business models with an impact, we talk about charities and we think, well, it's about donations. It's not entirely true. And I'll give you an example where people are willing to pay for products and services for people because it creates value for them. If they pay less than the value it creates for them, they're willing to pay. They want services, okay? So if we know that, how we create value, we need to ask ourselves, well, how do we do it? So what are the key resources. Do we need to manufacture something? Do we have factories? Do we need web servers? Do we need people? Do we need the brand, intellectual property? What is it that we need? And what is it that we do? Do we do marketing? Do we do fundraising? But what is it that we do? What are the key activities? Do we do design, programming? And then, since we're in the 21st century, we need to collaborate. To create great organizations, to leverage our business model, we need to work with partners, right? And then if we know that, we very quickly have an idea about the cost structure. So here you have on one piece of paper a very simple concept to describe your organization. Okay? So let's turn that into a tool. That's the concept. We want a tool so we can think about business models that matter, business models that have an impact. And that's how a tool looks. It's basically a structure where you can start putting up your ideas. Well, what is it that we're offering? For who are we doing it? What are the channels that we use to reach these people? What are the key resources? Then we understand what does it cost? What is the money that we make? And we get a simple equation. Is it sustainable or not financially? Okay? Very simple, right? It's very powerful because it's simple and because it's a shared language. So, let me give you an illustration. Grameenphone. So this is not just any business. It's what I would call one of the businesses that matter, one of the businesses that have an impact. So, Grameenphone was created by, it's a great TED Talk, look it up afterwards, by Tedxbotkyrka-Alexander. It's a Bangladeshi. He was an investment banker before creating that organization that I'm going to talk about. And he had a dream. And his dream was going back to Bangladesh and build a mobile phone company. But not just any mobile phone company, but one that would connect entire Bangladesh. At that point, Bangladesh was one of the countries with the lowest teledensities in the world, so very few phone lines, and particularly in the villages, there were no phones. Now you'd say, well, if we're talking about poor villagers, they have other needs. Well, you'll see, phones are essential, even for poor people, okay? So, how does the business model look like? Let's draw this out here on this canvas. So, first part, well, he wanted to offer connectivity to rural villagers in Bangladesh. So what would he need to have to do that? He would need, well, a mobile phone network. He would need to maintain the operations there, which is very costly, right? So to build that up, it's very costly. And he went to the World Bank, he went to the government, he asked for funding for this organization. They said, well, these people are poor. They have other problems than mobile phones, than talking over a phone. What do you think? Would you argue like that? Maybe. Well, it turns out that these people were very interested in using mobile phones. Why? Because they can ask for the price of the fruits that they produce. They could call the city and ask for the price. What's the price in the city? And they wouldn't get ripped off by the intermediary because they would know the price. They would have a better negotiation position. Or they could call their relatives and to organize a money transfer. And the money wouldn't get lost, okay? So they were willing to pay for that. But he still had to find out, well, how could he bring the phones in the villages? These people wouldn't buy mobile phones because that was really beyond their means. $40, $50 is not something that they could pay for a phone. So, he came up with an idea. He said, well, let's work with Grameen Bank. You all know Mohammed Yunus Microcredit's Grameen Bank, right? Won the Nobel Prize for that. And he thought, Tedxbotkyrka thought, if we work with Grameen Bank can offer microcredits to allow a lady in a village to buy a mobile phone. And she could, through buying the mobile phone with the microcredit, she could then start offering phone services to the villagers. So villagers would not buy a phone, they would buy the phone service from these village ladies. And the village ladies would earn money by doing that and pay back the credit. And Grameenphone would earn money because people were starting to use the mobile phones. And that's the way Tedxbotkyrka with Grameenphone connected over 100 million people with mobile phones. He created about 250 jobs for village ladies. They earned a living, their social status rised. That's a huge impact. And this business is extremely profitable. And it's the biggest taxpayer in Bangladesh, okay? Interesting, no? So, let's move on to the how. How do you come up with businesses like that? How do we create those businesses? How can we think about those things? It can be in the Swedish context, doesn't have to be in Bangladesh. How do we create businesses like that? Well, I think we need to work like architects. You know Frank Gehry? Frank Gehry, famous architect, known for one of the iconic buildings that he made, which is the Guggenheim Museum. Anybody been to the Guggenheim Museum? It's an amazing building, and it's a game changer. It was, at that time, it was really different architecture. They had to invent professions to make that building. Now, what's interesting here is that Frank Gehry, to come up with that, he had to synthesize a lot of knowledge, legal aspects, land use, users, the city. He had to synthesize that to make a building, but that's not something that drops from the sky. That's not pure inspiration and then you just know what to do. To do that, he needed to create a lot of study models, different prototypes, sketches, different scales, city scale, explore possibilities to find the right solution. It's not something that's linear. It's difficult to come up with something new and revolutionary. And only when you do that exploration can you come up with something like that. So what does that have to do with us? Let's pull it back to business models that matter. It means that, well, there's no easy solution. We need to start thinking of all those possibilities. We need to challenge ourselves and ask ourselves, well, could we create an organization that could have an impact? Could we do something that's even profitable, that we could live from? We could even create jobs and at the same time have a huge impact? Because it's only when you explore like that that you find a solution that could work. And we need to work together in groups around a language like that to come up with business models that matter. And not stop at the barrier of saying, well, it's either profit or impact. It can't be both. Okay? So, prototyping, what is that? I mean, it's sketching out on a napkin an idea. It's drawing a canvas like we saw before with a group of people. If you have one where you start making a business case, you look at the numbers, you do market research, and then you can start trying to field test. Could that really work? But we need to start doing that, at least if you're interested in having an impact, beyond simply making money. And some of you, I'm sure, are doing that. So you can get the tool actually under a Creative Commons license online, so you can have a look at that. And I'll give you one illustration, and then we'll actually run out of time. So still have 2 minutes, right? Okay. Illustration, Peepoopel. Who knows Peepoopel? It's a Swedish organization. Amazing. Go to peepoopel.com. You need to look at that. Why? Because it's a single-use toilet bag that could potentially solve a huge issue in the world. Now, that's a technology. It's a bag, a single-use toilet bag, self-sanitizing, biodegradable, turns into fertilizer, and it's targeted at the poor. So that's a product, right? And traditionally, we would say, well, that's a charity who distributes that bag. Well, they didn't stop there. They said, that's the product. But let's think about the business model. Let's not think as a charity or a not-for-profit. Let's start thinking like a business. And they hired a CEO, Karin Ruiz, who has the job to come up with a sustainable, financially sustainable business model that can also scale up quickly and have a huge impact and change one of the big issues in the world, the sanitation problem. That's amazing. And it's amazing that they do not accept that it's either impact or profit. They want to do both because they think that that's the way forward for a sustainable organization. Okay? So I'll stop there and just introduce you to what we're launching now. And that's a project where we want to get people from around the world together to think about this. So we created a website, Business Models Beyond Profit, where we want to get interested people, social entrepreneurs, we want to get business people involved to build a toolbox. We saw one tool, Business Model Canvas, that's a screwdriver, but we want all the tools. And we want all the people to participate, those who are interested, because that's where the knowledge is. I want to bring that together, okay? And one of the outputs will also be a book like the last one we did, very visual, very applicable, one that we can all use, and if we're motivated to do that, we can start, okay? Because I think, I'll leave this more as a question, well, could we? I want to. Up to you to decide if you think you could or you want to, okay? Great, thanks.